Okay, so this is lecture number um, lecture number 2 for the. Let me just arrange this better for the site translation for core interpreters class. We have completed lecture number 1 last week, where we covered some site readings, one that has no number, and another one I believe was number 6. I wonder if there was another site that we completed. If so, please let me know in the question section if I'm missing a site translation. But I know that we did the blank one without any number, and then we did site translation number 6. I have the impression that we started one site, but I don't recall exactly which site number that is. So if you could help me on that, that'll be just perfect. So that way I can work on, we can start working on those particular site, in that particular site translation. The plan today is to continue doing several site translations, and before we begin, if you just access, make sure you click on that monitoring button that is on top of the player, so that you can access, you can be in the, I can monitor you as you are actually doing the rendition, and then provide your feedback as I did last week. So just click on it and you will be taken to a room, and then you'll be in a waiting room, and I will be, I really see somebody coming in, so Sarak is there, so just stay in that waiting room until I actually decide to monitor you while you're doing the site translation. Once again, now we have Antonio Fuentes. Good. Again, the idea behind this is that I will get you some feedback on your performance, but there is no grade or anything like that. And obviously, when I'll tell you to do a site translation, you will do that site reading, and you will say it out loud, and when I start monitoring you, you shouldn't worry about anything, and expect an email with the link, with the recording of your performance, and my opinion on your, my feedback on your performance should be there, within 24 to 48 hours. Last week we were able to get it before 5 o'clock on Saturday. We don't really know exactly when that's going to happen, because it has to be processed by Zoom, and sometimes it takes longer than expected. So having said that, we're going to begin. So the plan today is to do at least 3 sites, maybe even 4. We will be discussing some new terms, some structures that are kind of new structures, and some transfers from English into Spanish that are actually transfers that are kind of tricky, and we would like to discuss those because they are kind of repeated in many site translations, and we'd like to discuss that and determine strategy for your exam if you come across that particular structure. See, the way you're going to be graded in your exam, in your state examination, is that when they design the exam itself, they're going to put different things there that they want to test you on. And it's not only vocabulary, as you may probably think. It's also on the structures. And sometimes the structures from English into Spanish are non-equivalent, meaning that you need to maybe add more words in Spanish, or maybe do a repositioning of the words when you transfer into Spanish. And all that is kind of put together into a 3/4 of a page paragraph, which is your site translation from English into Spanish. And therefore, when you see all those elements that they want to test you on in such a very short period of time, The first impression is that it's kind of dense with tricks, really, with material that is kind of tricky. They don't, and it is true because sometimes they test too many elements in 3/4 of a page, and you're just kind of, it's like they're shooting at you and you're dodging bullets one after the other, right? And it's just, they don't give you a moment to be standing still because they keep shooting at you. So that's kind of the way it feels in the exam. Not so much so from English into Spanish, but it will definitely be from Spanish into English. So the idea is for us to identify those structures so that you become really familiar with them. And as a result of that, they're kind of automatic to you. You just basically, they flow without major thinking process. It's just automatic, right? So having said that, we are going to be looking into those today. We're going to start looking into those structures. And they're not too complex. But for example, one, just to give you a kind of a preface of what we're going to be looking at. The passive structure in Spanish is not the preferable structure for legal matters, although it is preferable for literature, for many other forms of expression, so to speak. In the legal field, the preferable format will always be active voice. So structures, and in English, in documents in English, this is what they prefer the most, passive structures. And then the reason being that a passive structure allows the speaker to report an event without indicating who completed or who was responsible for that event. So for example, just to give an example, your application was denied, and that's all you hear. They don't tell you who denied it. That's an example of a passive structure. And the transfer into Spanish of su solicitud fue denegada, it's not as good as se denegó su solicitud, which will be the active structure. And we will see that when there is no participant in the passive structure in English, the transfer into Spanish is with a se at the beginning. We say that el sujeto es tácito, which means that we don't have a subject in that sentence. So therefore, since we do need a subject in Spanish, we do put se, S-E. So we're going to look into that today. And you can be, I can guarantee that there will be at least one passive structure in your sight reading from English into Spanish. And the reason why it is there is to see whether you have knowledge and the necessary training and the necessary practice to identify it and transfer as an active voice. Most people without any formal training will just keep it in the same word order. Thus, the transfer into Spanish sounds passive structure. A book was written by John, they will transfer it, those that don't have any formal training, as un libro fue escrito por John, when in reality you should say John escribió el libro. So, o escribió un libro in this case. And there are many examples like that they may not even sound correct in Spanish, yet people, when they leave it in passive structure, they keep the same word order, they leave passive structure in Spanish, and it sounds foreign to us but sometimes even in literature it sounds very foreign. So you can imagine that this is not the preferred form. And so we're going to look into that. The other thing that we're going to look into today is that sometimes the preposition at the beginning of a sentence, when the sentence has two modules, meaning that there is only one comma between. So there is a beginning of the sentence, comma, continuation, and then period. And then if the preposition at the beginning may require a switch of the components of the modules. So if you have, for example, after reading the document, comma, John signed it, instead of saying después de leer el documento, Juan o John lo firmó, we prefer in Spanish to say Juan firmó or John firmó el documento después de leerlo. And you can see that there is a switch there. So we're going to see at that as well. Those are the two typical elements that are actually included in the exam, and you're tested more on the formal training that you have. So we want to make sure that that's indeed there, and that you can deliver this correctly. First, you have to identify it, then you have to deliver it. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So besides the 3 or 4 sites that we're going to complete today, we're going to be also learning what we call transfer of structures, set structures, and we're going to be doing that, of course, throughout the lecture today. Any questions before we begin this lecture? Anybody has any questions? If not, we're going to begin, and we will do that by asking you please to go to site translation number 19. Number 19 in your manual. It's a site that begins with, "This is the case of the people versus Juan Martín Rodríguez." Here we are going to be looking at a couple of interesting things before you even attempt to do the site. So there are certain sites that I discuss with you, certain materials, so that when you do the delivery flows better. There are, in each of these sites, such as this one, number 19, you probably know most of the terms based on the prior vocabulary you studied, but sometimes there is the site itself introduces a new material, and then we want to discuss it before you do the rendition so that it doesn't affect your rendition that much, or the flow rather. So in this case, you're going to see a lot. You're going to see, for example, in paragraph number 1, kind of 55-60% down the paragraph, it says, "This motion, the court cannot dismiss a 187 case." It is very common in the legal environment to refer to a violation of a section of the code and to take that section of that criminal code and make a structure that it is kind of odd. Like, for example, this is a 187. This is a 211. And what it really means is, if I say, for example, this is a 187, this really means this is a first-degree murder case. If I say this is a 211, what it really means is this is a robbery case. Now, that is provided that you are in the state of California, because when you go and look at section 187 in the penal code for the state of California, you see that it describes murder in the first degree. When you look at 211, it describes robbery. In fact, those same numbers are used by police when they radio each other regarding a crime in progress. And they say, for example, there is a 211 at the corner of Main and 5th. And that 211 comes from the penal code. It's just kind of a code, really, between the police officers. Now, the problem with these legal documents is that when we transfer that into Spanish, first of all, the interpreter is not supposed to be transferring a section of a penal code for its corresponding crime, because we are not trained as attorneys. So we can't really do that, although we do know many of these sections because we're so used to it in court. 273.5, domestic violence. There are 23-152A, driving under the influence of alcohol. There are many ones because we get so used to it. But we are not supposed to do that. In fact, if I hear, for example, this is a 187 case, the way I transfer that into Spanish, instead of saying esta es una causa de asesinato en primer grado, which is really what it means, but what I need to really do when I transfer it to Spanish is basically transfer this is a 187 case as this is a case where for a violation of section 187. So you will transfer this. Esta causa es por un quebranto al artículo 187. This is a 211 case. Esta es una causa por quebranto al artículo 211. This is a 273.5 case. Esta es una causa por un quebranto al artículo 273.5. That puts a lot of stress in real life, when you're interpreting in court, puts a lot of stress in the mind of the interpreter. Because as you can see, you have to say a lot more words. 187 case basically is the number and the word case, whereas in our case, in Spanish, it will be esta es una causa por un quebranto al artículo 187. So 2 for, and you need to say 10. It's complicated. It really is complicated. So that's why in simultaneous, when the speed is very fast and you're working in the court system, most people say esta es una causa de 187, which basically means nothing to the person who's hearing you, but it doesn't mean much anyway to the one who speaks English and hears somebody saying this is a 187 case. So, it's not necessarily something that there's no major issue there. But when you do a sight reading that you have more time and then that the element of speed is not that critical, that is preferable that you transfer that in the way that I just mentioned. This is a 187 case. Esta es una causa por un quebranto al artículo 187. There's a structure in English that comes out often, and that's also on paragraph number 1. It's line number 3 from the bottom. It says, during the trial period, failure to comply. There is a structure which is failure to that you will see a lot. And when you see failure to at the beginning of a sentence, most people get hooked into this false cognate approach, and falla de and all that stuff does not work. Fail to in Spanish doesn't transfer as fallar. So if I say, for example, you failed to appear, we don't say usted falló comparecer. That's not Spanish. I don't know what it is. You failed to appear, simplemente usted no compareció. So that failed to means no, right? So failure to appear, so for example, failure to comply will be in Spanish el no cumplir. So failure to comply with this court order, el no cumplir esta orden judicial, ocasionará un desacato y se aplicará la sanción correspondiente a la fiscalía, basically, prosecuting agency. Now, so fail to by itself, fail to is no, period. Failure to is el no. And that's kind of something we need to keep in mind at all times. Paragraph number 2, the line number 2, it says, have a trial in your matter. Okay, matter is su causa, su asunto, su cuestión, but usually causa is good enough. Within 60 days. The key here is the preposition within. Many examiners actually complain that most candidates do not transfer within correctly. And it's such an easy preposition, but it will cost you dearly in your exam. Let's analyze this. When it says, for example, to have a trial, I'm reading this line here, the beginning of paragraph number 2, Mr. Martin Rodriguez and Mr. Prieto Quintanilla, you have the right to have a trial in your matter within 60 days from the date of. Within 60 days from the date of. So what does it mean in English? It means that the trial has to take place between now and 60 days. In other words, it can take place in 10 days, in 15, in 20, in 25. That's what it means in English. Now, if you were to transfer this as usted tiene el derecho en su causa, el derecho a tener un juicio en su causa dentro de 60 días. When you say dentro de 60 días, you're basically saying in Spanish that you have to wait 60 days to have the trial. So it's dentro de 60 días means in 60 days. So what we need to do here is include all the days before those 60 days. And that's why we say dentro de los siguientes 60 días. Dentro de los próximos 60 días. But we must add that dentro de los siguientes 60 días, dentro de los próximos 60 días, and that will be the best option for that preposition. Please be aware that they use waive and give up, renunciar y ceder. There is always a question as why do they use both. There's a technical there's a minor technical difference between to waive and give up. When you give up something, you give up for that particular session. So if I give up my right to have an attorney, I'm giving it up for today. Doesn't mean I'm giving it up for the next time that I appear in court. When you waive, you're giving it up for the duration of the case. So technically, to waive already includes the word give up. Because if I say I'm going to waive my right to have an attorney, it means I'm not going to have an attorney during the duration of this whole trial. But if I say I'm going to give up my right to an attorney, it's for today. So in court, particularly in cases where the defendant enters a plea, the judge wants to make sure that there is no grounds for an appeal, and therefore doesn't have to use waive and give up. With waive should be more than sufficient. But the judge, just out of precaution, the judge will say, do you waive, meaning for the duration of the whole case, and give up for today. So both, just wants to make sure that it has both. In Spanish, there is no such difference. Renunciar y ceder are the same, are synonyms. But in English, there is this redundancy used in the courts generally to prevent appeals that we have to somehow transfer into Spanish and kind of indicate in our transfer that there is another word there that is critical, right? So that's why we have to say renunciar y ceder. But if you have to pick between the two, renunciar is a much stronger term than ceder. Paragraph number 3 does not seem to have any major issues in terms of vocabulary. I don't see any major issues. Maybe you may not remember what severance of co-defendants is. La separación de los coacusados. And what it means is that you have two defendants for this trial. So they will now, instead of having one trial with two defendants, they're going to have two trials, one defendant each. The reason why this is done is because sometimes a defendant, if they are together, they may not be able to incriminate each other because the other person can hear and so on. So when they do it separately, the prosecution controls the who comes first, which trial comes first, which trial comes second. It's the defendant is able to much more easily, I should say, incriminate the other party. So and then any type of deal that can be obtained during the duration of that case, if the case involves two defendants, both defendants have to take the offer to close the case. And sometimes one does and the other one doesn't want to. So by separating it, there's more independence in terms of accepting the offer and in terms of controlling basically the outcome of the case. So, and that's why they do that. All right, so having said that, what we're going to be doing next is we're going to be doing this site translation number 19. I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to read it, okay? 4 minutes to read it, and then I'll tell you to deliver that, okay? So we're going to, please read to yourself, not out loud, to yourself, site translation number 19 that begins with, this is the case of the people versus Juan Martín Rodríguez and Pedro Prieto Quintanilla. All right, so let's do that. You have 4.5 minutes to read it, starting now, please.